The night I decided to disappear quietly from everyone who had ever known me, she grabbed my arm at the front door and refused to let go. I had been practicing invisibility for months, smiling at the right moments, laughing a beat after everyone else so it looked natural, eating just enough at lunch so nobody would ask questions. I had become so skilled at performing normalcy that I had almost convinced myself I was fine. Almost. But Cassandra Merrill had been watching me the way only someone who has survived their own silent war learns to watch others, and she saw through every single layer I had built. Before we go any further into this story, if you believe in the quiet power of someone simply noticing another person, if you believe that one moment of genuine human connection can change the entire direction of a life, please hit that like button right now, share this video with someone who might need it today, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. You are never as alone as you feel, and this community is proof of that. My name is Theo Vasquez, and at 23 years old, I had mastered the art of being the person everyone assumed was doing fine. I was the guy in the friend group who cracked jokes at bonfires, who showed up to help people move apartments without being asked, who remembered birthdays and sent voice notes and never, not once, let the mask slip in public. My best friend since the 7th grade was a guy named Marcus Merrill, easygoing and loyal as a golden retriever, and we had grown up in and out of each other's houses so many times that his family felt like an extension of my own. Marcus's older sister Cassandra was 7 years ahead of us, which meant that for most of our friendship, she had existed in that mythologized older sibling category. Someone who drove a real car and had opinions about rent, and occasionally made the rest of us feel like children without meaning to. She had moved back to town about 8 months prior after her own life had cracked down the middle in ways I only knew about in fragments. A divorce, a career change. Something about starting over in the city where she grew up because she needed to be near people who knew her before the world had gotten to her. Marcus never talked about it in detail, and I never asked, because that was the unspoken agreement we all had with each other's pain. We circled it carefully and called that consideration. The particular evening everything changed had begun as nothing special. Marcus had thrown together one of his low-key dinner gatherings, the kind where 6 or 7 people end up sitting on kitchen counters, and someone always burns garlic bread, and the conversation moves from sports to philosophy to childhood memories without anyone steering it. I had come because not coming would have required an excuse, and I had run out of believable excuses weeks ago. I sat in the living room with a drink I wasn't tasting, watching everyone the way you watch a movie when your mind is somewhere else entirely, registering the shapes of things without absorbing any meaning. The truth that I had been hiding for the better part of 7 months was this. I was drowning. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have shown up on a surface scan of my life. I still had my job as a junior architect at a firm downtown. I still paid my rent on time. I still texted back. But somewhere in the previous winter, something in me had gone very quiet in a way that felt permanent, like a light that flickers for a long time before finally going dark. I had stopped caring about things I used to love. Drawing for pleasure, which I had done since I was 8 years old, had become impossible. I would sit at my drafting table at home and stare at the blank paper until I closed the notebook and went to bed. Food had lost dimension. Sleep came in broken, unsatisfying pieces. I moved through my days like a man walking through water, and I smiled at everyone because smiling was the thing that kept people from asking questions I didn't have the energy to answer. I hadn't told Marcus. I hadn't told anyone. Because saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't prepared to face, and also because some stubborn, exhausted part of me kept insisting that it would pass on its own if I just kept moving forward. I had been telling myself that for 7 months. I left the gathering early, which I had been doing more frequently and which I had been covering with increasingly creative explanations. Early morning meeting, slight headache, promise to call my mother. That night, I used the early morning excuse, made my rounds of hugs and fist bumps, and slipped toward the front door with the practiced ease of a man who had been making quiet exits for the better part of a year. I was reaching for the door handle when her hand closed around my forearm, not aggressively, not in a way that startled me exactly, but with a firmness that was entirely intentional, that communicated without a single word that this was not a casual touch. I turned, and Cassandra was standing in the hallway behind me, still holding a dish towel from the kitchen, her expression carrying something I didn't have a name for at the time. A combination of certainty and gentleness that felt almost unbearable to be on the receiving end of. She said, "Stop hiding." She said she knew something was wrong, and then she just waited. There is something uniquely disarming about being seen by someone who doesn't need anything from you in return. Cassandra wasn't asking me to explain myself so she could fix it or file it away or turn it into a story she would tell later. She was asking because she had been in the place she suspected I was currently standing, and she recognized the particular posture of a person who is carrying something alone that is becoming too heavy. Her eyes were steady and patient in a way that made my chest hurt because I realized in that moment how long it had been since anyone had simply looked at me like that. I told her I was fine. Of course I did. It was reflexive, that word. Fine. Worn smooth from overuse, pulled out so automatically that it barely felt like a lie anymore. But she didn't move. She didn't accept it. She kept her hand on my arm and tilted her head slightly, and she said something that broke through 7 months of carefully constructed armor in about 4 seconds flat. She said she knew what fine looked like when it was real, and she knew what it looked like when it was armor, and she had been wearing that particular armor herself long enough to recognize its exact weight on someone else's shoulders. I don't know what it was precisely. Whether it was the unexpectedness of it, or the 8 months of exhaustion that had finally accumulated beyond what I could carry quietly, or simply the fact that she had said the true thing without flinching. But something in me cracked open in the hallway of my best friend's house with the sounds of conversation drifting in from the next room. I didn't cry right away. I stood very still and looked at the floor and felt the crack spreading through the careful structure I had been maintaining. And then I said, very quietly, that I hadn't been okay for a while. She didn't gasp. She didn't immediately reach for her phone to call someone or launch into advice. She nodded slowly, like I had confirmed something she had been patient enough to wait for, and she said, "Let's sit down." Not as a question, as a quiet, steady direction from someone who knew what the next necessary thing was. We sat on the back porch steps, away from everyone, in the kind of warm evening that makes the world feel temporarily suspended. The sounds from inside were muffled and distant, and the yard was dark except for the string lights Marcus had hung along the fence 2 summers ago and never taken down. I stared at those lights for a long time while Cassandra sat beside me without filling the silence, which was itself an act of extraordinary kindness because I had been surrounded by noise for months, performing and deflecting and redirecting, and the silence she offered felt like the first real breath I had taken in a long time. I told her things I had not said out loud to any living person. I told her about the emptiness that had moved in during the winter and hadn't left. I told her about the drawing, how I had loved it my entire life, how it had always been the thing I returned to when everything else was difficult, and how losing access to it felt like losing a language I had spoken since childhood. I told her about the smiling, about the performance of being fine, about how exhausting it was to maintain and how impossible it felt to stop because stopping would require explaining, and explaining felt like climbing a mountain I didn't have the strength for. I told her I didn't know what was wrong with me, which had been part of the terror of it, that there was no single cause I could point to, no obvious wound, just this spreading grayness that had swallowed the color out of everything. She listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer counter-arguments, didn't tell me about people who had it worse or remind me of my blessings. She just listened with the particular quality of attention that makes a person feel that what they are saying matters, that they matter. And when I finally went quiet, she sat for a moment longer in the silence before she spoke. She told me about the year before she moved back. She told it plainly, without melodrama, the way people tell true things, the collapse of her marriage, which had been failing slowly for so long that the actual end felt almost anticlimactic. The way she had continued going to work and meeting deadlines and calling her mother on Sundays while feeling entirely hollow inside, convinced that if she just kept the external structure intact, the internal wreckage would eventually sort itself out. She told me about the morning she had been sitting in her car in a parking garage, already 20 minutes late to a meeting, and had simply been unable to make herself open the door. Not out of sadness exactly. Out of a complete depletion of the will that usually moved her through the world. She sat in that car for an hour and 15 minutes, and then she called a therapist she had saved in her phone 3 months earlier and never called, and she said that phone call was the beginning of things actually changing. She wasn't telling me what to do. She was telling me that she understood the specific geography of where I was standing and that there was a path through it, and that the first step was allowing someone to help rather than insisting on surviving alone. We stayed on those steps for over an hour. The party wound down around us and people filtered out, and Marcus knocked on the back door at some point to check on us, and Cassandra told him we were having a conversation, and he nodded with the easy trust of someone who has always believed his sister knows what she's doing, and went back inside. The string lights stayed on, warm and steady against the dark, and by the time I finally drove home that night, something had shifted in the air around me. Not fixed, not resolved, but changed in some fundamental way, like a window that had been painted shut for months had finally been eased open just enough to let a thread of outside air through. I made an appointment with a therapist 4 days later. I sat in the waiting room in a state of acute vulnerability that I dealt with by reading every poster on the wall twice. And when I walked into the office and sat down across from a calm, unhurried woman named Dr. Osei, I told her the same things I had told Cassandra on those back porch steps. Perhaps more easily, because I had already said them once and discovered that saying them didn't break anything, that the words could exist in the open air without catastrophe. The months that followed were not a clean, upward line. Healing, I discovered, moves more like weather than like architecture. Unpredictable, nonlinear, sometimes arriving as a warm front and sometimes as a storm. There were sessions that left me feeling wrung out and exhausted, and there were weeks where the grayness thickened again, and I had to remind myself that this was part of it, that setbacks were not evidence that nothing was working. I started drawing again in small ways, nothing ambitious at first, just 10 minutes before bed, just marks on paper with no pressure attached, just the re-establishment of a habit that had been waiting for me to return to it. The first time I drew something that felt alive, a study of the window in my apartment with the late afternoon light coming through it at a particular angle, I sat back and looked at it for a long time and felt something move through me that I didn't have a word for, something adjacent to grief and gratitude at once, like recovering something you had stopped believing you would ever find. Cassandra and I built something unexpected over those months, a friendship that existed independently of Marcus, rooted in the particular intimacy of having been honest with each other in a hallway late at night. She checked in without hovering, she sent occasional messages, a funny observation, a book she thought I might like, sometimes just a single line asking how things were going and meaning it. She had the gift of making care feel like company rather than surveillance. And I tried to learn from it, tried to extend that same quality of attention to the people around me who might have been wearing their own versions of the armor I had finally taken off. There came a day, about 6 months after that porch conversation, when I was at Marcus's house again for another casual gathering, and the evening was warm, and the garlic bread was burned again, and everyone was sitting on kitchen counters. And I realized, partway through a genuinely funny story someone was telling, that I was laughing, and the laugh was real, unperformed, unscheduled, arriving from somewhere genuine inside me. I noticed it with a kind of wondering attention, the way you notice a bird that has landed unexpectedly on the windowsill. And then I let it happen. And then I forgot I had noticed it because I was too busy being present in the actual moment. which is perhaps the best description I have of what returning to yourself feels like. I caught Cassandra's eye across the room at some point that evening, and she raised her glass slightly in the smallest possible acknowledgement, and I nodded back, and that was all. Just two people who knew what it had cost to get to a moment as ordinary and irreplaceable as this one. I want to pause here and ask you something important. If this story has reached you, if something in Theo's silence or in Cassandra's refusal to accept a practiced fine has touched something in you, please leave a like on this video right now. Share it with someone in your life who might be hiding something heavy behind a convincing smile, and let us know in the comments that this story mattered to you. Your engagement keeps stories like this one reaching the people who need them most. What I want you to take from Theo's story is not simply that things got better, though they did, and not simply that he found the right help, though that was essential. What I want you to take is the moment in the hallway, the hand on the arm, the refusal to accept the performance, the willingness to say the true thing out loud and then wait. Cassandra didn't save Theo with grand gestures or perfect words. She saved him with attention, with the decision to notice someone and refuse to pretend she hadn't noticed. We live in a world that moves very fast and asks very little of us in terms of genuine seeing. It is easy to accept the fine and keep walking. It is easy to believe that the person who seems to be managing is managing, that the one who always shows up for everyone doesn't need anyone to show up for them. The truth is that the most isolated people are often the ones who have become the most skilled at not appearing isolated, and the intervention that changes everything is sometimes as small as a hand on an arm and 4 words spoken without apology. If you are reading this from inside your own silence, I want to say directly to you what Cassandra said to Theo without flinching. Stop hiding. Something is wrong. That is not a failure. That is a human being carrying something real, and you do not have to carry it until it crushes you. There are people who will sit on back porch steps with you in the string light dark and listen without needing you to perform recovery before you've had the chance to begin it. Those people exist. Sometimes they are waiting in hallways you are already standing in. And if you are reading this from the other side, if you are the person who has survived your own silent winter and learned to recognize the posture of someone drowning quietly, trust that instinct. Reach out. Hold on. Say the true thing and then wait. You may never know the full shape of what you prevented, but somewhere in an apartment with a drawing table and a window full of late afternoon light, someone will be marking paper and feeling grateful for the night you refused to accept fine as an answer. Before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Drop a comment below with the word "seen" if this story reminded you that someone in your life might need to be seen right now. And if you are the one who needs to be seen, type "I'm here" and know that this community sees you. Theo Vasquez still has quiet days. He still has mornings where the weight of things sits heavy before the coffee kicks in, days where he has to make a deliberate choice toward the light instead of waiting for it to arrive on its own. But he no longer makes that choice alone, and he no longer mistakes silence for strength. He draws every day now, not out of discipline, but because he missed it the way you miss a part of yourself, and getting it back taught him that the things we lose to our own despair are not always gone forever. He and Cassandra still have long conversations. He has become, in his own way and in his own time, someone who notices, someone who pauses in hallways, someone who asks the real question and then stays present for the real answer. Because one woman grabbed his arm at a front door and refused to let the performance continue, an entire life turned toward something worth living. That is how it works sometimes, not in grand rescues, in a hand on an arm, in 4 words, in the decision to see someone, really see them, and refuse to look away. Sonnet 4.6.